Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going on a really fascinating journey, one that connects a 14th century North African thinker to some of the biggest ideas in 20th century social theory.
We're talking about Ibn Khaldun and his masterwork, the Muqaddimah.
And his core concept, Asabiyah. So our mission for this deep dive is to tackle a huge question. Can you really call this medieval scholar the first true structuralist?
Meaning, did he see history as being driven by these deep, hidden forces rather than, the actions of great men?
Exactly. The kings, the queens, the generals. Was he looking deeper?
And to give you the shortcut right at the top, the answer is sort of. He's not a modern structuralist in that strict academic sense.
Okay.
But, and this is the crucial part, his idea of Asabiyah is an incredibly powerful precursor to that kind of thinking. He built a framework that puts the system, the collective, above the individual.
So he's building the foundation, even if he didn't build the whole house. Let's unpack that. Let's start with the concept itself. What exactly is Asabiyah?
At its simplest, it's group solidarity, social cohesion. But it's more than that. Think of it as a kind of social energy, a binding force.
Okay, a binding force.
It's that shared unity, usually from kinship or tribe, that's absolutely essential for survival, especially in a harsh environment like the desert.
And what makes it structural, not just a feeling?
It's that it operates above any single person. It's a super individual force. It doesn't really care about the personal ethics of the ruler or the citizens.
So let me get this straight. I could be the most virtuous king in the world, but if my people's Asabiyah is weak, my personal goodness doesn't matter much.
It's almost irrelevant. Your kingdom is doomed anyway. The force isn't in you, the king. It's an objective field of energy in the society itself. It determines whether you can defend yourself, whether you can conquer, whether you can hold on to power.
And this is what leads to his most famous idea, the cycle of history.
Absolutely. This is where he looks so much like a modern theorist. He says history isn't random. It follows a predictable pattern driven by the rise and fall of this one force.
It starts with the Bedouin, the nomadic life.
Right, where Asabiyah is at its peak. Survival is tough, so you need absolute group loyalty. You need to sacrifice for the whole. That intense cohesion allows them to conquer a region and establish a state.
And then they move to the city, the Hadari, the settled life.
And the city is, in a way, the poison.
Mm-hmm.
Comfort, luxury.
Mm-hmm.
They soften that tough cohesion. The state provides security, so you don't need your cousin to have your back in the same way.
The bonds weaken.
They decay. And eventually, that group becomes vulnerable. Another group from the desert, with a fresh high level of Asabiyah, comes along and replaces them. The cycle begins again.
That is just a radical break from how history was written at the time.
Totally. History was a chronicle of great deeds, of powerful personalities. Khaldun is saying, no, look underneath. The real story is the invisible social structure, the strength of these social ties. That's a profound structural sensibility.
He's not writing a biography of an empire. He's writing its anatomy chart. He's asking why they rise and fall in the first place.
And his answer is a system. It's a process. It's not just about one person's choices.
Okay, so to really see the parallels, we need a quick benchmark. What do we even mean when we say 20th century structuralism?
Good question. At its heart, structuralism is a massive shift in focus. It says the individual is not the most important thing, the system is.
It's the rules of the game, not the players.
That's a perfect way to put it. The goal is to map out the deep grammar, the logic behind everything we see, whether it's language or myth or society itself. Structuralists see history as a system with rules.
And this pops up everywhere in the mid-20th century. You've got Saussure in linguistics saying meaning comes from the structure of language itself.
Then Levi-Strauss takes that idea into anthropology, looking for the universal structures behind myths and kinship. He finds the same basic stories repeating in different cultures.
You also have Althusser arguing that economic and ideological structures basically create us as individuals.
And of course the Annales School historians who started looking at the longue durée, the deep, slow-moving structures of geography and climate, instead of just battles and treaties.
So the shared idea is the deep structure is what's really running the show.
Exactly. Which brings us right back to Ibn Khaldun. We can see some really strong parallels now.
Let's lay them out. Parallel A has to be his rejection of hero-centric history.
It's the most explicit connection. He literally says, states stand not by persons, but by Asabiyah. The ruler is just a manager, and their hands are tied by the collective strength or weakness of their group.
So when an empire falls, it's not a leadership failure, it's a structural failure, a failure of social cohesion.
Yes, the structuralist looks at, say, Julius Caesar and says, if it wasn't him, it would have been someone else. The conditions were just right for that kind of figure to emerge. Khaldun is implying the very same thing. The personality is just filling a role dictated by the force of Asabiyah.
For the 14th century, that's just mind-blowing. Okay, parallel B, these repeating historical patterns.
Right, that cycle from Bedouin to Hadari and back again. The key here is that it's not random. It's governed by the internal logic of the social structure itself. The system produces its own rise and its own fall.
And that kind of structured repetition is exactly what Levi-Strauss was looking for in myths.
It's a direct comparison. Levi-Strauss found that different stories were just different expressions of the same underlying structure. For Khaldun, different empires, different dynasties, they are all just playing out the same fundamental logic of Asabiyah. The form of history is constant.
Okay, and the third parallel, C, Asabiyah is a condition, not a choice.
This is a deep one. You don't just decide to have high Asabiyah. It arises from your social and environmental conditions. It determines who you are.
So the Bedouin isn't tough because he decides to be. He's tough because the desert makes him tough, because survival demands that he be part of a cohesive group.
Exactly. His behavior is determined by the structure he's in, which is very close to Althusser's idea that the subject is constituted by the structure. You are a product of the system you're born into.
The parallels are, they're undeniable. He really does sound like a structuralist. So why isn't he? If it's so close, why do we always say he's just a precursor?
Because there are a few critical differences. And ironically, these differences might actually show that his analysis was, in some ways, more complete than the really rigid structuralism of the 20th century.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first major difference?
It's his focus on time and change. Khaldun's entire system is about process. It's about how societies change, grow, and collapse over generations. It's fundamentally a theory of historical dynamics.
Right, whereas classic structuralism, it's more static, isn't it?
Very much so. It's often focused on a synchronous analysis, taking a snapshot of the system at one point in time to see how it works.
So structuralism is like taking a perfect detailed photograph, but Khaldun is making a time-lapse video that shows the building rising and then crumbling.
That's a perfect analogy. Rigid structuralism always struggled to explain where historical change comes from. Khaldun's model has the seeds of its own destruction built right in. So he's closer to, say, historical sociology than to pure formal structuralism.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second difference? You mentioned moral elements.
Yeah, and this is a big one. Modern social science tries so hard to be value neutral, to be objective. Khaldun doesn't. He openly links the decline of a state to moral deterioration.
So things like the pursuit of excessive luxury, corruption.
The softening of character, the loss of virtue. He sees these as part of the decline. Now, a modern structuralist would say those are just symptoms of the structural decay, not causes. But Khaldun weaves them together. He's both analyzing the system and diagnosing its moral sickness.
Interesting. So the structure creates the conditions for moral failure to happen.
That's his view. They're intertwined.
And the final difference. You called his an open system.
Right. Asabiyah isn't the only thing that matters in his theory. It's the engine, but it's not operating in a vacuum. It interacts with everything else: geography, climate, economics.
So a harsh climate might actually boost Asabiyah because people have to stick together.
Exactly. And a land of plenty might soften it much faster. So he's doing a multi-factor analysis. He's looking at how different structures, social, geographic, economic, all intersect. A lot of classic structuralism tried to reduce everything to one master structure, like language or the economy. Khaldun's approach is more complex, more holistic.
So if he's not a classic structuralist, where does he fit best? If we had to put him in a modern theoretical box.
I think the closest kinship, the deepest connection, is with the French Annales School, specifically with Fernand Braudel and his concept of the longue durée.
The long duration. The idea that history is shaped by these huge, slow-moving forces under the surface.
Precisely. Braudel wanted to look past the froth of events, the battles, the politics, and see the deep currents of geography, climate, and long-term economic cycles.
And Asabiyah is one of those deep currents. It's not an event. It's a structural condition that plays out over centuries.
That's the best way to see it. It exists in that deep realm of structures. It defines the historical potential of a society for generations. He was doing the work of the Annales School 500 years before they even existed.
That really clarifies it. So let's bring it all together. What's the final takeaway for you, the listener, who's been on this journey with us?
I think the most accurate way to frame it is this. Ibn Khaldun didn't just stumble upon a structural idea. He systematically established a structural perspective on history, centuries ahead of his time. He built a science of civilization that put the system first.
He put the structure side of the whole structure agency debate on the table before the terms even existed. It's just an incredible intellectual achievement.
It really forces you to question how we think about the history of ideas.
It does. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to take away. Given that Khaldun's analysis managed to include historical change, process, and even those moral dimensions that 20th century structuralism often tried to exclude, what does his work tell us? Maybe it suggests that a truly powerful theory of society needs to be more like his flexible, multi-layered, and able to account for both the rigid power of structure and the messy, dynamic reality of historical change. Perhaps the goal isn't to be a rigid structuralist, but something more.